Okay, with that, we are going to ask our panel to please rise and come up on stage, and we are going to start our GIO session. I'm going to let the panel actually introduce themselves with their details. But what I do want to say, and the reason they're here, is because of I think I look at these individuals as people who have shaped the national. Do we have to sit in the order of our pictures? Yes, actually, that would work perfectly. I will sit then over there. I don't know, just leave an open seat and I'll be fine. I just want to start off with Jonathan Duran. He's from Arkansas, and Jonathan was president of NISHIC right as when I became president-elect. He was the president, and I would like to say he's my mentor, but the issue is I could never live up to the stuff that Jonathan was doing. He is a machine. He knows everything about first the organization and then just about products and data and policy and just everything. And I could never, ever know that. And even to this day, even as president, and he was past president, he was still spoon feeding me on things I need to be doing and should be doing and whatever. And he needed to be here because I think he's probably one of the most seasoned individuals at NISJIC. So, and I thank him for showing up today too. Shay Lamar, believe it or not, I've only really met Shay a year ago. But sitting with her that year in San Antonio, she would talk and we would be in these little kind of subcommittees and we would just discuss stuff. And everything she was saying, I was like, that's it. That's right on. That's exactly how it, and it just kept going and going and going. And Shay's new to her role in Arizona. But I think you're going to make a huge impact in Arizona personally. But the bottom line too is, I believe she's going to be a future leader in the NISJIC organization. And so before she gets too big-headed and all that stuff, I thought we would get her here first. But just an amazing person. I think has some great insight and some great thoughts and has really got me thinking about my own state and just some of the things I think we ought to be doing. Shay, thank you for coming for sure. Mark Yakuchi, I think he's the one I said that he has very little filter sometimes. But Mark is brilliant. And Mark was when I first became president, I knew there were some things I wanted to do. One of them was the strategic plan. And the presidents usually go up and meet just the presidents and discuss it. Mark was a board member at that time. And I asked him to come join us, which is not normally what you would do. But his concepts and ideas were spot on with what I was thinking, but he had articulated them even better. And so he was a person I really relied on to get his information from. And I think we developed a very, very solid first strategic plan, an action plan. Mark now serves as current president of NISJIC. So he gets to take the things that we said we're going to do and do them. So he's got the hard job. But Mark has always been an inspiration, and I think he's just a brilliant individual. And he's another reason why I've asked Mark to attend. And so with that, can I get a warm round of applause for our three panelists? And I'm going to take my seat and turn it over to Gayla.
And Richard, if you didn't know, is our state's Geographic Information Officer for Texas. Okay, let's get right into it. I'm going to ask several
Richard,
questions.
Do you accept Venmo for that fine introduction you gave us all? We'll settle up on that later.
What size cement shoes do you wear again? I'm sorry.
Okay, we're going to start off with an easy one that I want to hear from each of you on. What is the single most critical geospatial data asset or geospatial initiative your state is currently focused on? And follow up to that, what are some of the biggest challenges for getting that, accessible and in wide use in your state? So we'll just start at the end with Jonathan and go down the line.
Do I only get one? You said single most.
Single most,
Okay.
yeah. You can do a second if you like.
Like many other states, something that's been driving a lot of the work we've been doing for about the past 5 years is 911. A little over 5 years ago, Arkansas legislatively took a really big step and even we didn't say this. Some folks in the industry said this with the legislative steps Arkansas took toward Next Generation 911. What they told us is Arkansas just leapfrogged to several other states, and so there was some really some vision there from both our state legislature and some other folks who were really pushing for that. Like so many other things, and you've seen this, that the 911 technology, which life and death hinges on, was driven by the same technology that some of you remember. That old phone that was on your grandmother's wall with about a 20-foot cord on it, and there was a copper wire behind that thing.
That was on my mother's wall, not my grandmother's.
Well, so
I used to have to drag when I wanted to go talk to the girlfriend. I had to go run.
You stretched it to the other room.
Stretched it to the other room. Yeah.
Like I said, Richard, Scott, and I know several of us, you started working with GIS back in the 1900s. Back when those phones were still on the wall. But all the 911 technology, no matter what face was on it, still hinged on that technology that powered that old rotary phone that was on the wall. And so now Arkansas has really gotten the game there and stepped forward, and that has driven a lot of the work that we've done over the past 5 years. We're now at the point of seeing sort of the light at the end of that tunnel. All our counties except one, we have kind of this one rogue county, except one, are all on the state EZNet, and most of those now are very close to, if you're in that world and you understand the significance of having that GeoMSAG set up. So most of those counties, most of those PSAPs are at that stage now. So like I said, that's probably, if I had to single out one, that's been the single most biggest driver, and it's really helped drive some of the quality aspects of those, because those data sets, we've had those data sets, many of those data sets, for a number of years, and now there's a very compelling reason that drives the underlying quality of those data sets, because that's, as you know, that's sort of the fuel in the tank of the whole entire Next Generation 911 back end, if you will.
So similar to Jonathan, our big push has been, the most requested one was address points. It was moved forward by Next Generation 911, but the majority of our users have nothing to do with NG 911. They just want address points, and they prefer not to use 10,000 credits geocoding things through Esri. So that's been a huge one. That's done really well, coordinated through our 911 office. So now the big push is to get parcels at a statewide level, so that you guys wouldn't understand, but we have a whopping 15 counties in Arizona, so you don't know the stress we go through. But yeah, I know. They are huge. I mean, bigger than,
Some states.
yeah, some states.
Do you have more or less than Montana?
Ooh, good
Oh,
question.
that's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
If
Less,
only we had a
someone said.
device that could
I
tell us
know.
that.
So the pressure. Okay, so our big push has been gathering that and allowing it to bringing it together at the statewide level, so that the poor counties don't get asked 82 times by every different state agency, can I get your parcels? Can I have your parcels? The challenge with that is there are certain counties in Arizona that they are still driven by their people tell them they have to charge for data. So I'm guessing about 15, 20 years ago, Geotrobia, our equivalent of the GIO 15 or 20 years ago, actually somehow, the man is a god, got a state statute through about data sharing. And it said, it's like 7 short lines, but it said public agencies may share data without a written agreement, without being held liable for anything that comes forth from actions taken on that data. And it had like 6 other nice, easy, just allowing you to share data, not forcing you, just allowing it. And that opened a whole world of data sharing that didn't exist before, and has been just a key to being able to move forward, getting the public data.
I know most of you have no idea who Gene Trobia is, but
He's a god.
in Arizona he has his own bobblehead. So if that tells you anything,
It's true.
All right, so I gotta start a little different here. Based on your,
And you only have 2 minutes.
yeah, well, that's because John talked too long. So I'm gonna take my time whether you like it or not. Since you started with the wall phone, I just want to see a show of hands. When the power went out, does anybody remember picking up the wall phone and calling a certain number to figure out what time it was?
Yes.
Put your hands up. I want to see where we're at. That's about what I thought. Maybe a third to a half of the crowd. The rest of them were like, "Wait, what?"
time and temperature.
Time and temperature. Yeah, time and your time and date. Yeah. There was always a number. I'm going to echo what both of you said because it addressing everything through Next Gen 911 has really gotten us moving and getting those address points and things like that. Our biggest challenge or things we're starting right now is parcel data. Illinois has 102 counties, so not quite as many as Texas, but we're a smaller state. So the biggest challenge there being not wanting to give it up. I mean, some counties will, some counties won't, some will want to charge for it, etc. We did not get a lovely little agreement through. We did, however, though, get a what do you want to call it? I guess, yeah, it's in statute. We get a statute passed that says that a county can charge at least, and they can charge as much as they want, but they can charge at least a $3 GIS fee on all deeds records whenever you change. Oh, yeah. So unlike Aaron in Montana, where it's tied to the percentage of how much is financed, this is just a flat fee, and they get like the highest charge by any county. I can't remember which county it is charging $88 every time you do a parcel transaction for GIS. Now,
So you're rich, is what you're saying.
no, because the counties raid the fee and then they do other things with it and they claim it's for GIS. However, that does bring up an interesting concept. If you do this and then you turn around and charge for your GIS data, are you charging the taxpayers twice? Is that legal? I don't know. That's our little, that's what's coming out of this. It's going to be interesting to see what that is going forward. So, did I get that under 2 minutes?
You did.
Oh, good.
You did good.
And real estate transfer is one of those pipe dreams in Arkansas, as far as a potential source of funding for GIS.
I'd like to I'd like to change it from $3 to $5 and then take a cut of it and fund a GIO's office, because we do not have a funded GIO's office. We have a statute that says subject to appropriation, and so I don't actually exist. I am a geologist in our state geological survey, so doing this for giggles, not exactly. But.
Sure.
So I'm going to stray just a little bit, and nothing towards the 911 folks that are out there, because that is super critical information. But
Liar.
because they all did it, I'm just going to be different a little bit. But personally, I believe LIDAR for Texas is the data set that it keeps on giving. From our standpoint, the residual products that you can get from LIDAR has been a game changer. We're a flood state. And that becomes the biggest things. As y'all know, we've recently had a major flood back on July 4th, and data was in question. And the reality of it is, though all those other things are critically important and they're high on our priority list, for the bang for the buck for one data product, I have to say LIDAR is the one that I think is the critical one to do. The challenge on it, though, is that it's super expensive. Texas is a huge state. I think we computed about $100 million or so to try to, Joey knows this better than I do, but to try to do it, all on our own or something. That's about how much it would cost. So we have to do things kind of piecemeal, which is a drawback. But bottom line is derivative products you can do. Building footprints, building height, culverts and bridges and all the other things that you can extract from that information, contour lines, it just keeps giving for the, it's expensive, but you get so much out of it and you continue to do that. So I would say that would probably be our number one. And for those of you who disagree, these people can disagree. Nobody can challenge y'all because they don't know, but they can all like Richard's an idiot. But anyway, that's my thinking.
I won't argue with you there because it's been ours. I say parcels because that's our next project, and the next thing we're trying to get is a statewide parcel there.
Right.
Our LiDAR, our 911 has been mature for a long time.
Right.
But I agree with you. The amount that you get back out of LiDAR,
Right.
and even, well, at the time, aerial imagery, when that started, like you showed up earlier.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah,
Well, talking about all these data, were you going to
I
say
would
something?
I would tend to agree on the elevation data. In Arkansas, we're very fortunate that over the last couple years, 2 to 3 years, the USGS has funded the collection of about 3/4 of Arkansas, and we put in the other part through their DCA process. But as a result of that, Arkansas is one of the few states that's had a statewide refresh that occurred over a 2-year period for QL1 LiDAR. And so that's probably one out of every 4 calls that we get to our office is, hey, when's that LiDAR data going to be available?
Yeah.
And right now we just have to say, we're not sure because the federal government shut down.
Good thing we got a lot of this acquisition in earlier. Okay, talking about all this data leads us to something called the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, which we know a lot of you in the audience might not know much about, so we're going to hear from our panelists about that. My understanding is that each of you have a different definition of the NSDI. Again, that's the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. So just real quickly before the actual question, can each of you give us just a brief description of what your definition of the NSDI is?
You're first.
Richard.
Okay. So
Down that way.
I have a real simplistic view of what NSDI is. I think NSDI is, obviously national data infrastructure, but what it is, in my mind, it's not necessarily a thing. It's a process. It's a way of aggregating data up from the locals all the way through the states, all the way to the national level. I don't believe it necessarily has to be something that we have to get personally with the counties to say, please change your schema because it doesn't match this other thing. We have a national address database where that kind of happened, where we had to kind of modify our schema just a bit so it can fit in there. That was okay with us because that was a brand new database for us. So we just went ahead and did that, and we make sure that we have a person that makes sure that happens. But bottom line, in my mind, simply put, it's a process, some governance about how data gets aggregated in. And I think in today's technology, it's definitely not something we have to go through and manually do. I think software applications that are out there with our business partners have the solutions to aggregate it up by leaving the schemas the same. But if you understand what you have as a base and you know what you need to go to, you can just aggregate like Safe Software almost does, just almost out of the box. But there's others that do that. And so my feeling is if it's the buy-in, the process, and the adoption of it is the hard part because you got to get a lot of people together agreeing with what that one thing is. So that is kind of my simple perspective in SDI is.
I thought we were supposed to have different answers.
Okay.
You didn't rehearse this.
No, we didn't.
Well, he went into the couple of the 2 improvements too, and so that's also part of the question. So if you want to expand on that, you can.
Well, no, what I was going to.
I think the reason we have the same ideas because we talk.
Well, that's probably true.
That's probably how we.
That's probably true. The thing I would add to what you said is it's also a mechanism for sharing the data back out from the top down, and that part is we need to get the data from the bottom up into an infrastructure and have the governance and everything to be able to work with that. But then we also need a way for individuals or companies or people, government, whatever, to get the data back out in a consistent fashion.
Yep. A good point.
I agree.
Thank you, Shay.
Ditto.
You don't get off that easy. Come on.
I concur. I don't. I mean, yeah, I agree. To me, it's the infrastructure in place that allows us to do data sharing between state, municipality, tribal, private, public.
Jonathan? into improvements to it?
So
Oh, I know. Okay. If we're on
Improvements?
to improvements,
How much
yeah.
time do we have?
She's
Yeah.
opening
She
has
her
notes.
book.
Look out, guys. Yeah, I have
you have
notes. So the biggest one is actually, because it involves data accessibility, the thing that would help us most goes back to Richard's point, which is funding for higher resolution, regularly updated data at a state level. So, and to Richard's point, getting parts of, have any of you ever tried to do analysis with imagery from one year and LiDAR from another year, and then you try and compare it the next year and LiDAR is from another year, or your county is broken into chunks?
Yes.
I mean, there are very valid reasons for this, and we are not all made of money, except the city of Austin. I have since found. No, I'm teasing.
Isn't made of money, Mom? Just call Mom.
There you go. Yeah, my mom hangs up. So, so there are very valid reasons for it, but helping us to obtain that core foundational data, which for us is LiDAR and imagery, so that we can build our own products, would be hugely helpful. So as soon as the federal government opens back up, I will be sure to ask for funding for that.
Jonathan?
So the NSDI, or National Spatial Data Infrastructure, was invented as a concept, at least, way back in 1994. So the concept's been around for over 30 years.
Since the 1900s.
Yeah, since the 1900s. And that's been one of the complaints of a lot of people, is that we've been talking about this crap for 30 years. Why don't we have it? But as what is it, or a definition, I tend to go back to a gentleman named Josh Delmonico, who was previously the executive director for the Federal Geographic Data Committee, or FGDC. He described it as a three-legged stool, and I think it is both, to agree with Richard, both an abstract concept and also a non-abstract concept. Josh Delmonico, he would describe it as a three-legged stool, and he would break NSDI out into three parts: national, which means it's a national thing for everyone; spatial data, you really can't have it without data in some form; and then you've got that infrastructure, which is all about the governance and how we get it and those types of things. Here's the catch: this doesn't have to be invented. States like Texas and Arkansas and Arizona and many others around the state have already done this. In Arkansas statute, you may have it in Texas statute, I don't know. In Arkansas statute, we have the words Arkansas Spatial Data Infrastructure. You can go to our agency's website right now, and if you want this data about Arkansas, type it in, search, boop, there it is, here's how I get it, done. That's all the spatial data infrastructure is. You got the data, here's how to get it, and here's a delivery mechanism, and there's governance behind it. Does that sound complicated? It doesn't to me. Mm-hmm. All these states have already done it. That's been one of my biggest complaints in the whole thing, is the model's already there. In some regards, the NSDI has sort of been an FSDI over its history. F being federal, so federal spatial data infrastructure, but that's never what it was designed for. And that's probably, if I came back to an improvement, and there's efforts to do that right now, but really to move this concept out, not to exclude the federal government, but to move it beyond the federal government, to include the federal government. If you read not that any of you would do this, but if you read the Geospatial Data Act of 2018,
get AI to do that for you.
Yeah.
Unless you have insomnia, in which case, go for it.
7 stakeholders identified in that: federal government, state government, local government, nonprofit, higher ed, tribal. So if you really want to get to a national spatial data infrastructure, there's your roadmap to who. And private sector's in there too. So you really have to broaden this thing to include and make it really a part of all those stakeholders and not just one stakeholder.
But Jonathan, isn't the challenge, Arkansas's done it, Arizona's done it, Texas, probably not, Illinois. No, we've all done it.
Nope,
And
I'm state of confusion.
We've all done it in our own way. So getting, it's like translating 50 different languages. If you want, that final key is getting the Arizona to work with what Arkansas, which also works with Texas, even in the infrastructure part. So the other thing I had asked for were common MOUs, memorandums of agreement, and SOPs. What are those?
So Jonathan and I remember we had a debate on this because there's this thing about, if we could get OGC to set standards or whatever, kind of standardized stuff. And of course, OGC wants to make sure the states weigh in, and that's good. The problem is the word standard seems to hang people up. And so, and nobody wants to talk about a standard because it's kind of, I guess, this finality of that whole thing. And every time we'd be talking to folks at the federal level, nobody really wanted to make that move. And then you and I started saying, well, don't call it a standard, call it a requirement. Or I forget what our statement was.
It wasn't
Unfunded mandate?
it wasn't requirement. It was,
something else.
specification.
Specifications. And I was like, well, okay, now we're just getting mixed into semantics here. But it seems to be when you go that route, when you start saying, well, let's get a standard for the NSDI, that's where everything just seems to come to a grinding halt, because then it's that word, and we can't get past it. In my mind, that's where I feel like the hang up always is.
I agree.
So I don't know how we get past that unless we can say, let's call it a standard that can be modified later or whatever.
Yeah, I didn't say it was going to be easy.
Yeah.
I just said it shouldn't have taken 30 years to do
I
this.
know.
Excellent point.
I will say, Jonathan, if you want a spot for all the groups to get together, that spot exists.
Mhm.
It's called the National States Geographic Information Council, which is why the four of us are sitting up here.
Exactly. Yeah. I feel like that is the job of NISHIC, and we have to move forward on that.
Things that are worthy of doing often aren't easy to do. So
And I will say that you don't need a standard.
No.
You just need that other it's two four-letter words put together. Meta, data.
Well, and there's a gentleman, I guess he still works for the Federal Highway Administration. He may have retired by now, but one of his phrases, and I've always liked this phrase, he always said, there are two kinds of people. There's people who have data, and then there are those who wish to standardize it. So,
Well, hopefully this is a great perspective for those of you that work, on data at the local level and how that, filters on up to the national level and how important that is. Thank you. So, Shay, you mentioned accessibility, and this kind of goes into our next question about how data are accessed and interoperable. And so the next question is, what institutional or policy mechanisms do you believe are most necessary at the national level to truly have real-time, seamless, interoperable data exchange between the federal government and all of our 50 states? I'll start with you, Shay. Do you have your book open?
Okay, I'm going to fall back on a national sharing policy that has authority and protections, but to your gentleman's point, it's flexible enough to allow sharing without just making a bunch of rules that I now have to meet those rules too. I mean, that just kills it in the tracks. But having the clearly defined processes that help me understand, like if I'm going to run FME to get it into a standard schema, I can still do my own thing, and you are providing the infrastructure through rules and hardware and software to allow whoever needs it to aggregate it up to the level at which they need it. That, I think, would be most helpful for Arizona.
Mark, it looks like you want to say something?
Well, it's going to go right into your last question, but
Okay, let's do it.
As things are progressing along with AI, ChatGPT, Gemini, Cortana, all the things that are out there, FME did this years ago. It can read all the different data types. And now we have the ability to read all of those data types and push it back out in a way that you need it, you need it, you need it, you all need it. But I think that probably within 5 to 10 years, we won't be talking about it anymore. It'll just be happening and you won't realize it.
Richard, would you like to comment on either AI or interoperability?
Interoperability to me, I'll just hit that one. I think sometimes, and there's certain states that are worse than others in this, but there's still that hang up about personally identifiable information being accessed in a particular way, and what is that mean? Some people, it's your name and address and, age and any demographic you have on yourself. Others just say it's it's just an address of a point is not acceptable. And so sometimes we can't get out of our own way to decide that, which causes us not to be able to do the aggregation, at least completely. And so I feel like there just needs to be some sort of way to at least address that. I think Jonathan probably has experienced this just because of their completeness in their programs with parcel data and address points, and that y'all have basically a statute in place for that stuff. Am I right?
So, yeah, some of that stuff we do. It's not with every what we would consider a framework data set. The roads, the address points, the parcels, the boundaries, such as that. Some things we do have state statute that requires. And I say requires a county to give us that data. Well, they were already doing it. It just says, because what we run into in Arkansas is the biggest issue we have a lot of times is when you've got a person in a county and they learn how to do GIS things. Then all of a sudden, that they weren't doing before, now they've got a marketable skill, and they go find somebody that'll pay them more money. And then you're back to square zero there in the county. And so we have that turnover, and there needed to be kind of a trap almost to make sure that data still flowed. Elected officials come and go, and then those people in those staff positions come and go. So we really needed that trap to keep that stuff coming to us. But going back to your original question about policies and things like that, is from the perspective of the or an in SDI, that has for a long time, all the governance of that for a long time happened within the FGDC, or Federal Geographic Data Committee. Although there were 6 other stakeholders in the mix, none of those 6 other stakeholders had any seat at the table for decision making in that governance. So that's as far as even from a NISJIC perspective, that's one of the big things that we push on, and I think we'll be ultimately successful in that, is that that the decision making in governance has to involve all the stakeholders and not just the federal folks, which in the beginning the federal government was really, if you think about 30 years ago, the federal government was really the only place that had the capacity in a lot of cases to do those things. That was where there was a need, and that's where the bandwidth or the capacity was at the time. We're way beyond that now. Go and kind of branching off on something Mark was talking about, the role or the place or whatever of all the many things that can be done now. AI is not a new thing. We all know that. It's just that I like to say it's now become mainstream. Machine learning and all those types of things aren't new concepts. They've been around for a while, even going back to the 1900s when I was in grad school. I remember there was a PhD student working on his dissertation, and it was about machine learning, and that was in the mid-90s. Imagine that. But I don't think we can even begin to imagine what in the geospatial realm and what we can do. I don't think we have even scratched the surface and have no clue yet what all those capabilities are going to be as we move forward. And it's, we're going to look back in 5 years and say, can you believe we used to do that? And now it's like that.
So I want to come back a little bit to, you talked about private data and what everybody thinks is private and should or shouldn't be private, because this brings us to our next audience interaction moment. Raise a show of hands. Who's Googled themselves? Those of you that haven't, wow, I'm impressed. Okay.
Yep, that's true.
Yeah, I always tell people, there's always, conspiracy theories that always are around. Like, maybe it was different in the past, but don't worry about what the government knows about you. You need to be way more worried about what Google knows about you.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah. It used to be, you used to turn something in to the phone company to say you wanted your phone number to be unlisted.
Yeah.
Again, go Google yourself and see what's out there. You're worried about whether or not something is private or public.
Right.
Well, why don't we talk about AI a little bit more? Because I want to hear from each of you about what you think are the most promising geo AI or machine learning applications that perhaps you have currently piloted or deployed within your state, or if you have any, further opinions. Or we'll start with you, Richard.
So there's two things that I always think about. One of them is using AI to find patterns and information that you would not normally have found on your own, right? So one thing that I've always talked about as a solution to low water crossings, and some of you in this room have helped me work on this, but build an intelligent system that can look at all the parameters being fed to it to determine when a low water crossing is gonna go under. But that involves obviously metadata, that involves real-time information being fed. But if you look at a low water crossing, you're talking about gauges that are near real-time feeding information. You've got real-time weather forecasts that are changing. We have Mesonet out there now that can get real-time rainfall data. You have traffic patterns that are available, not necessarily to the public, but they do exist on how traffic is flowing. So let's imagine you got a low water crossing and you're trying to determine if it's going to fail or not. One, if you have test data or data from previous times that it failed and you maintain that and you can learn on that, that's one step. The other step would be use real-time information like gauge data, traffic data to determine if, let's say, a speed limit across a low water crossing is 35 miles an hour, but traffic is flowing at 5 miles an hour through that area. What does that probably tell you if you have all the other conditions looking like flooding's happening? That means there's water on the road and they're going through cautiously. So you could get an AI system that just does nothing but monitor this information, and when all these parameters line up, it could send out a warning to law enforcement or the police department or fire department to go out and check that gauge and close it if it needs to be closed, so it'd be more proactive. So AI is going to make data more proactive. I think that's one thing. I think the other thing data is going to do as well is it's going to, AI is going to be able to essentially aggregate information the way we were just talking about in SDI, right? It's going to be able just to say, I see these data sets out there and they got great metadata, and you just tell me what you want me to do with them and I can just do it. And it just can just happen. To Jonathan's point, we'll be saying, remember when we used to, spend a year figuring this out or aggregating it? It's just going to start happening. Map creation, I saw Phil Worrell, remember when Phil was just prompted a map, build a map that does these things with this data, and it creates this gorgeous map. And then told you exactly what data sources it pulled from, how it used it, and generated it, and it was absolutely amazing. So, Geo AI for map making is that's going to be a thing too. And that's just coming up in the next few years. So,
and then the thing that's going to spawn is, did the AI make that map right? Correct.
What was your thing? Trust but validate.
Yes, trust but validate or verify, something like that.
Yeah.
Garbage in equals garbage out.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So machine learning wise have gone back. Probably 10 years ago now, because now you have the fastest supercomputer, but we used to. We also have Roger, which was the original GIS supercomputer at U of I's campus. And they were doing some work with the LiDAR data to find all these sinkholes in the state by running an algorithm on the LiDAR data in the point cloud. Obviously now that's like a no-brainer and you just do it. But we have partnerships with Google and whatnot to try and start using AI for scientific investigations. And even the scientists aren't quite sure what to do with it. But to your point of the traffic stuff, there's data everywhere. And we don't pull it all in. We don't recognize that it has a geographic component or whatever. But I think with AI, that's probably going to change. And you're going to use stuff that you didn't think about using. Right. During the first time the eclipse came across the United States, I was with our State Fusion Center at the epicenter in Carbondale, Illinois. And when we were done, the Fusion Center GIS person and myself were looking at maps. And we were just trying to figure out how we were going to get home. And we zoomed out in Google and we had the traffic on. And you could just perfectly see the path of the eclipse across the United States in Google traffic. You didn't even, So the data, like you said, what's the traffic in around your low crossings or whatever. Yeah, you're going to use different things that you hadn't thought about using.
Exactly.
That's what I think AI is going to do.
I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction. So do you want to go first?
Sure.
Great.
I'll just describe something that we've been doing in our office that it's pretty innovative. It really doesn't necessarily it's not some whiz-bang thing that we took all this data and run it through this AI thingy and spit out something on the other end. So just to set this up, in Arkansas, as of several years ago, now hold on to your seat here, the state surveyor in Arkansas reports to the state Geographic Information Officer. I'm going to pause there and let that sink in for a minute. So yes,
That's a coup.
The state surveyor's office is nested within the state GIS office. And one of the statutory responsibilities of the state surveyor's office is to archive, catalog, etc., plats that surveyors around the state do. Those all have to be sent to the state surveyor, and there's one central repository for all those survey plats. Well, there's certain information that has to be, by law, has to be included on a plat. Various list of things. All those things don't necessarily have to be in the same spot on that map, so there's not a template, a statutory template for that plat, but certain pieces of information have to be on there. And as part of that cataloging process, we have a person in the office, that's our plats coordinator, and she receives those, catalogs those, records information about them, etc. Well, that's, as you can imagine, a fairly laborious process. So now we've been working with some AI tools to read information off those plats and automatically put it into a database. She, of course, then validates that it did it correctly, but it has sped up that process in ways you just can't imagine. And so this goes back to, you get the thing, oh, AI is going to replace us all. No, it's not. Now, that's an example of where these AI tools streamlined an otherwise very laborious process, and now that person has more time to do other more productive things. So it's not that AI is going to replace us all. Maybe in some regards, I don't know, but at least within specific things like that, it's just another tool to make you better at what you do.
Did the microwave replace your oven?
Do what?
Did the microwave replace your oven?
No.
Yes.
Oh, the air fryer did, but the microwave did not. Okay.
But otherwise, something that I would like to do, going back to I think Richard and Mark, is we're getting all this really good elevation data that's coming in now in Arkansas, and I would really like to just say, here's all this data. What can we dig out of this data, and what little AI tool can we use to feed it in there and find the Lord knows what. It's like the sky's the limit, that kind of stuff.
Totally agree.
Okay, first off, I have not had enough Coca-Cola because if you mention your statewide LiDAR data one more time, I am so jealous. Okay.
Statewide LiDAR data.
Oh, that's it. Turn off
Just
the
hit him with the
camera.
microphone.
So, how many people in here work for a government entity? Raise your hand.
Yeah.
And how many people work for a private entity? Okay. How many people who work, raise your hand if you're government again. How many of you have AI policies at your government office?
Yeah.
And how many of you know what they are? Okay. Private, raise your hand, please. How many of you have AI policies at your office? Wow, she's got some serious policies. And how many of you know what they are? Okay, great. So at our state conference a couple months ago, I did a very, very stupid thing. And I made an AI for Dummies presentation. It is a very bad idea because I am a dummy when it comes to AI. And I thought, okay, I keep hearing these terms. I need to get the rest of the room caught up to where I am. So that was just an incredibly stupid idea. Nothing like trying to figure out something that is constantly changing. That being said, I did learn an incredible amount, and I understand why entities need to put policies into place for AI. My biggest love of AI is automating those tasks that are just mind-numbing and I don't want to do over and over. So documentation and programming, so those types of things. But the challenge is, in the state of Arizona, for very good reasons, you cannot use generative AI unless you get an exception at this point. It's just so new. And generative AI is anything that makes something new. So machine learning doesn't necessarily create anything new. It could just look at two differences and plug through. But write a letter of reference for me. Oh, that's generating new content. Documentation is generating new content. So I think a lot of us run into the challenge. If you could help me get rid of those monotonous administrative tasks, that would free me up to be doing, okay, what can I look at and how can I make new data with it? Which again, making new data is generative AI. So for me, my biggest challenge is the amount of time it takes to fill out the paperwork to get one piece of software to do anything generative. I don't even have the time to fill out the process.
Use AI for that.
There's going to be no mail
On your
left
home
on
computer.
this stage by the end. Richard, tread lightly, young man. Okay, so I see real value in it, but then I have heard of another agency where they do want to use AI to look at, you took out a permit to do agriculture. Are you doing agriculture? Basic land change, look at that. Are you doing mining? Are you following the rules? But some of their employees, they want to hit the magic button and then get the answer, and they are not verifying. They are only trusting, and it's back to GIS. I taught at ASU for 20 years. If I say, how did you get that result? And you say, press the button. So AI is that on crack. So lots of great things coming. I would be excited if I could do the basic things that allow me to do all these other cool things.
So to follow up on what you just said, we have some, like I said, I work for a geological survey. We have some scientists who are working, they just finished writing an NSF grant. They hope to get it, but part of the grant is to do a bunch of stuff with our data to make it for outreach and whatever. And they started to write into the grant something to the effect of putting everything into AI. And I stopped them and I said, is all of your data that you want to put into AI publicly available? Well, no. Well, then you can't put it into AI because as soon as you do, you're making it publicly available. You've made it to the AI. You can't just do that. So you have to think this through a little bit before you...
Thank you. So just go ahead.
What you feed Chat GPT is there forever.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
Oh, Chris?
I'm just really curious. You hit on it, you touched on it a few different times here, but everybody in the industry wants to know not necessarily what I can do with AI, because a lot of people have already explored that, but how's it going to affect our jobs in the long term? And so I'm really curious from your perspective. I gave a talk yesterday, and at the end I just put my little take in there that I think that very basic skills like digitizing something is probably going to be entry level sort of data entry stuff is probably going to go away. But what are some of the areas that you think are safe from losing your job?
I don't want to go there, but I just to toggle to what you're saying, I want you to think about it this way instead. For those of you that raised your hand that you've called for the time, how did the internet change how you work? Did it cost you your job? I would think that AI is going to be along a similar path. It is going to offer something that we can all utilize as an extension of what we're doing and to assist in our jobs, but it is not a replacement for what we do.
I remember when I got into computer science, my sister actually told me computers are going to put us all out of business, put us all out of work. And she was totally serious and actually kind of hated me for, doing that. And, the bottom line is no. But what it did do is create new jobs too, and made people who use their, who were doing something, let's say a cashier. Remember when cashiers would just punch the buttons and hit all the, and it would just make that noise, they'd hit it and hit go, and
Did you
they
just
wouldn't
do this?
Yes. And
Do you remember the old cash registers?
the
No, I
register,
don't. Because I'm 29. Or sorry, Richard, keep going.
But yeah, I mean, so yes, I understand now that we can go and scan our own stuff, and cashiers are not there necessarily anymore, but they still are. They're the ones that now move your thing from here to there over a scanner. It just made it optimized it. It made it different and faster and less error because they were hitting the wrong buttons or whatever. So my thing is AI is just going to make us, I think, more efficient when it gets to its maturity. It will, I think.
Yeah, I think if I can chime in, I think a lot of us see that if you look at those, analogies, that all the jobs aren't going to go away. So my question is really, from your perspective, if you can foresee, how does it change? So what kind of, maybe some of the cashier jobs actually did go away, but still those people are doing something else. Or I like the way you said it, Jonathan, because it's just going to free up time to do other things. We can all look at our jobs and say, oh, if I had more time, I would do this and I would do that. But I can't do that right now because I don't have the resources or I don't have the time. It's going to free up the resources and time to do that. But that's a shift. And I guess I'm asking if you have any sense of, the kinds of shifts. And think about it like if you're, or maybe you have some kids in college, I do. It's like, well, if you're going to go into GIS now, what would you tell them to do in GIS that maybe you wouldn't have 20 years ago? Because you're probably not going to be doing that anymore, but you might be doing this now with AI. That's kind of where I'm coming from.
Well, just to kind of throw this out there as a what if the things that maybe were that entry level, what we've historically considered entry level work, maybe that shifts because I can do that with some other tool now. Well, perhaps this is again a what if the person, perhaps it was doing that before, now their task is that when we say trust but verify, maybe their task is to check the AI results. I don't know. That's just something to throw out there wall and stick.
You used to wait for Esri to write a tool for you to do a task. Then they came out with the model builder in Python, and you could write your own tool or you didn't even need to know Python. You could grab the model or make a model. Hey, this is what I want to do. And next you're going to be able to just type in, I want to do this, and it's going to build the model for you. So your entry level now can conceptually think about what they'd like to have done and be able to do it, whereas in the past they would have to figure out how to code, how to do whatever to do that same task. Yes.
Good.
I'd love for y'all to expand a little bit because y'all keep saying entry level jobs, but honestly, when I perform analysis, it's my experience that lets me know that the results are actually correct. So how do you see entry level people validating and expecting them to actually know if these results are worthy of being published? Where's that accountability and responsibility coming from?
Supervisor? I don't know.
Their boss.
Yeah, so it's the supervisor's job to also check and recheck the data. So it's just how do we get those skills and those people there? And is that now part of the supervisor's job to
Experience
actually
still matters.
validate the validation?
And I wanted I hear what you're saying too, Courtney, but I want to go back to Chris's question just a little bit because, you said, how do you teach this stuff? This is actually being on the advisory council at ACC, where AI is now being introduced into the curriculum and stuff. You don't not teach these stuff still. In other words, you still have to have the base knowledge of what's happening so you can do that validation. So I would say, at least for the foreseeable future, they still teach, do they still teach long division and,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I mean, because then they use calculators now.
They still teach graphing.
Exactly. So my point is, you still have to know the basics before you can move on to the other stuff. So I feel like it's not going to change, at least for the short term, any educational procedures, I wouldn't think. But I do think then it will lead on to, okay, now that you understand the concepts, how does AI now affect that, and how does it optimize maybe what you're doing? And I think that's when you start to understand the value of AI to make you more efficient at what you're doing. So that's where I see AI.
And maybe in some regards we're not far enough down the path yet to really know how to answer that question.
That's true.
Fully yet.
Yeah.
That being said, I taught at ASU for 20 years, and
I thought you were 29.
I started when I was 9. Damn it, Mark. So,
Talk about doing that math. Yeah.
yeah, fart my math. I really didn't learn subtraction. So, I have always spoken to people, and I also worked in the field, and the number one thing they requested was, you have to get us people with critical thinking skills. Mm-hmm. It's just, and I was like, great, you teach me how to teach critical thinking and I'm gonna be a billionaire. But yeah, to your point, it is a lot of work on the supervisor at the beginning and learning the basics and then verifying it. But the critical thinking skills, they've always been needed, and that hasn't changed with the advent of, with the integration of AI.
We have just a few minutes left, so I'd like to be able to open it up to any other questions for our panel. Great opportunity for to understand their perspectives from our other states. So any other questions for our panel? Just Jackie's over there.
I love that you guys know you all know each other and calling it out by name.
And I'm sorry if you covered this, but from a national level, are you hearing or thinking about geo AI standardization or guidelines or things like that?
I don't think we're hearing it from the national level because they can't even tie their shoes at the moment.
That's correct.
So I feel like it'll be with the typical aggregate what's happening at the states up to a national level policy is where I think it's going to go. Well, are we, Mark? Mark's president.
Yeah.
Mr. President, why don't you tell
I
us?
mean, AI comes up when people like Richard decide to give a presentation on whether or not he can use satellite imagery to find sandbars in lakes.
Oh yeah.
There was that. Yeah, it's slowly being talked about. It's being utilized. The number of committee things that I'm on, and the chat bot has been added to the meeting to take notes, or somebody has decided to use Chat GPT to write something for us, or so it's being used, but not really being.
There's no
We just don't know.
policy.
Yeah, there's really nothing we can. We're just kind of like you guys, watching and utilizing and trying it out and seeing what's going on.
It literally changes weekly.
Yeah.
You can't chase down something that's running from you or is greased up or whatever you want to call it. But yeah.
That being said, and I know we just have 1 minute left, especially the self-navigation that's been coming forward, these people have been dealing with AI for a long time, and a key that I keep hearing over and over is metadata. You have to have that data available in a way that the different systems can read it. It's become even more important as AI moves forward. And someone asked, we have a GIS 101 group in NISJIC, so we have webinars a couple times a year open to the public based on topics people think they want to learn more about. And someone just asked me to find someone to speak about, with the moving forward of AI, what updates have there been in metadata and where is it going, which I thought was a fascinating topic, and I have yet to find anyone who can speak well to that. So if you know anyone, please come find me afterwards, because metadata and moving forward with AI, a lot of us are like, it doesn't seem to have changed in the past 20 years, but we're thinking it must. So in that aspect, it's going.
Yeah, one just to add really quickly, most of those policy things I've seen so far are driven at the state level. However, what I've also seen or not seen is that things that fall under geo AI are sort of this little niche thing almost that people doing those state level AI policies may or may not even pay attention to.
Okay, we have time for one more question over here.
Yeah, actually, whatever you nailed down the point on the metadata part, actually, which is the critical efforts required to maintain it, and using the AI, and it can able to generate the clear insights about even taking the audit logs and different kind of information about the fields and the data. The agent can able to study and generate automatically. That is really saving a lot of time, and where we deliver the value to one of the client and the national mapping agencies in UAE. That is one of the good use case. And also there are a lot of other things, like when you are building an NSDI, there are two aspects of it. One is like a public good, how this spatial data can able to support on the sustainable development goals and education, health, and environmental aspect of it. And instead of just sharing the public data, deriving that value and showing that what is the potential value out of their schools, combining the multiple data sources. Like when you are in a census, you talk about the census data, but you are in a municipality, you talk about it, and when you are in the education sector, you talk about it. But as an SDI has the power of combining all these data sets, can able to show how the state progressing in terms of the education versus population, economic development, and all this combination of it. Like, nowadays, SDI is transitioning towards the public good, and how it is really, helping the data to an intelligence, and developing some AI agents can able to transform this data to intelligence. I'm happy to share my knowledge, and I've been working with the Spatial Data Infrastructure Program last 15 years, and we transformed the UAE, Abu Dhabi, national mapping agencies. Also, we are part of the UNGGIM private sector network, and I'm very familiar with the IGIF framework. And recently, OGC and as well as Saudi GOSA, together they built the sustainable funding guide for the for the SDI. How this funding guide, like who will really fund for the SDI program? What is the value deriving from that actually? So OGC is contributing a lot on that. And another part is like a standards actually. That is one of the thing. Everybody thinking that we are giving all the data to the SDI. No, it's not fact actually. It's like we don't want to touch the operational layer of it actually. But what is required for a community to share about the assets, about the whole land use, land cover, and historical transactions happen. so that if you understand that kind of thing and building an SLAs between the stakeholders and the SDI in the state level and then SDI in the national level, this will really transform the value actually. This is what based on my experience, I want to share that.
Thanks.
It's an important point for return on investment for sure.
Yeah, we'd
well,
like to get one of those, but
I
we're working towards that.
I know we have different versions at Texas too, but not a full report. Well, I definitely want to thank our panel for being here. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks.
Thank you, Shay. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Richard. And especially, Richard, for rising to a leadership level at NISJIC. As you can tell, they are a close-knit group, and they share information not only with these states, but a whole host of other states as well. And so we've really been able to learn a lot from the other states and bring that back to Texas. So one more round of applause for traveling here.